Cormac McCarthy fans, welcome to the Cormac McCarthy Biography. And today, in part number 2, we will be talking about Cormac McCarthy's lost years and his time in the United States Air Force. My name is Ian, and on this channel right now, we are doing a major deep dive into Cormac McCarthy's works. So if you were interested in that or the Cormac McCarthy course, I have a bunch of links down in the description below. So the 1951 to 1953 period is the lost time of McCarthy because we have little to no information about what he was doing. All we know was that he was attending the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. We also know that by 1953, he makes a drastic life change and joins the Air Force and gets shipped all the way up to Alaska. So what happened during these 2 years that drove him toward this decision? And I think it's actually very easy to speculate, especially because this is the start of a pattern that McCarthy does for the rest of his life. When McCarthy feels stagnated and frustrated, he flees Chicago, New Orleans, Spain, El Paso, New Mexico, North Carolina. He spent considerable amount of time in different locations when he was trying to rev up some energy, make a big change. This is a very common theme in his life. But why would he feel frustrated about attending the University of Tennessee? It's actually very common for what you could say the genius rebels to conform to academia. I have a very similar story to Cormac McCarthy. I attended university for 2 years and just couldn't handle it. And we also have information from this time in Suttree. We know that Cormac McCarthy was dealing with some very goony individuals, J-Bone and all these people. And during his sophomore year at the University of Tennessee, he was able to legally drink at bars and go wherever because in 1952, Cormac McCarthy was 19, which was the legal drinking age in Tennessee. So obviously this could take multiple directions. McCarthy could be getting in trouble or partying so hard that he needs to flee. There's a family angle that McCarthy feels constrained by Tennessee in general and being too close to his family. We've also seen this through Suttree and through other novels where the young male protagonist, feels constrained by his family, so he flees, he goes on this journey. And last, McCarthy could have been feeling intellectually stunted. So when we, combine the family, the friends, and the intellectual entrapment, I feel like this is more than enough for McCarthy to say, I want to get out. But transnational travel isn't very easy for college students who don't have that much money in 1953. So like many young men and women throughout time, Cormac McCarthy said, I'm going to join the military. And I think him joining the Air Force says a lot because in 1953, the Air Force was relatively new. And kind of like today, you could find a non-combat position pretty easily somewhere in the Air Force. So McCarthy gets sent to Alaska to serve his 4 years. And can you imagine a better place for Cormac McCarthy to be? In the middle of Alaska, working a non-combat jobs. This is everything, an individualistic, mercurial, curious, young man needs. It's like McCarthy. And his initial job in Alaska was as a navigator. But for some reason, after about a year and a half, that doesn't work out. And McCarthy then, for the next 2.5 years, is the night radio disc jockey for the base radio station. So either two things happen if you get that position. Either you screwed up really bad and they just had to put you somewhere, or you kind of have made enough connections that you can say, I want this kind of easy position. Serving a military career out, spinning records at night when you're able to read and write and do other things with probably no hierarchical stress other than just, the common stuff in the military. That's the best thing that you can ask for if you're like McCarthy, who at this time started to read viciously. But before we get into the fun stuff, the reading and the writing, I just want to talk about, did Cormac McCarthy experience some form of trauma while in the military? Because when any creative individual, and most individuals in general, join a very hierarchical organization that wants to constrain individuality and creativity to create a command structure, negative things can happen to people. Obviously, like the mental constraints, the feeling of being trapped, having to shave your hair, wear the uniform, be on a base in the middle of Alaska, and you have to be with the boys. I've known a lot of people in the military, and that was very hard for them. For some people, they loved it, and it was totally fine. But for other people, when they look back at the experience, they view it as something that's very negative. And Cormac McCarthy, throughout all of his work, only mentions a historical war one time. In McCarthy's second to last novel, The Passenger, there is a somewhat major scene about the Vietnam War, a character telling his experience. Yet there is a lot of violence in McCarthy's novels. When I read Blood Meridian, and I know there are a lot of people who get the exact opposite reaction. When I read Blood Meridian, though, I view it as an anti-war, anti-violence novel. When you give an artistic piece something that extreme and you go all the way. For a common empathetic individual, it creates a sense of repulsion, especially the first time you're reading it. And with repulsion comes the seed of change, thinking about, how can we end violence? Why is there this malignant aspect of human nature? We also know that Cormac McCarthy is very critical of the nuclear bomb. In Stella Maris, he says the nuclear bomb was the start of modern evil and will probably be the end of humanity. It's really, really shocking stuff because he was once in the military. 8 years after they dropped the nuclear bomb, he's in the military. And with someone as perceptive as McCarthy, we would have to assume at that time he was starting to question his position in the military, thus a massive pickup in his personal reading habits. And this is supposedly the first time McCarthy really read, like took serious, took intense classics or literary fiction seriously. I'm sure Faulkner, Melville, Hemingway, all the usual suspects are being read by McCarthy. But at some point here, the seed is planted in McCarthy's mind that he wants to be a writer. And how do we know this? Well, once McCarthy was done with the Air Force in 1957, he returned to the University of Tennessee, which we'll talk about in part number 3. But while he was there in 1959 and 1960, he published A Wake for Susan and A Drowning Incident, his 2 published short stories, which he later won some money for. And when I read these 2 short stories, I think that it's possible from 1957 to 1959 he could have become a good enough writer to publish those stories. It's not out of the realm of possibility, but I would guess that during this era McCarthy started writing again for the first time. It may have taken the form of journals, to-do lists, notes, but when you have this time when you're out there, he very much enjoyed fishing. That's what he mostly did during the daytime, fishing and reading. When you're out there, you begin to start to lean into writing. And McCarthy, as we know, published a couple things in his school newspaper. When he was younger, he had finished part of a novel when he was 8 years old. And then by 1959, he already is starting on The Orchard Keeper. So I would say that in his Air Force experience, that seed of being a writer, trying to be something better, because you have to realize if McCarthy is out there and he's got this disc jockey job, that means once again that he wants to take the easiest route. And we have this guy who's a huge hobbyist who loves to explore and to do these things. And what job is there that gives you a insane amount of freedom? Well, it's being a writer. And once again, as many young men, including myself at 21 and 20, thought, man, I can really do this. I have some talent. If I work hard for a couple more years. For McCarthy, it was 8 years till The Orchard Keeper was published. I can make it. I can make a splash on the literary scene. I'm good enough. So I'd like to know your thoughts. Did Cormac McCarthy, you think, start writing, more seriously in the Air Force and playing with it, or when he got to university? And if you don't know, you can read A Drowning Incident and A Wake for Susan online, and you can see the level where he's at. I think that they are good enough that he may have needed more than 2 years unless he no-lifed it. So, in part number 3 of Cormac McCarthy's biography, we are going to be discussing his second tenure at the University of Tennessee, him meeting his first wife, and the final decision to leave academia and, at some level, the literary world forever. And when that one comes out, it will be right over here. Peace.